really wanted to like wear a dress as my outfit for this video, and my wife said that wasn't gonna happen. I'm like, honey, it's the last video, and the conversation didn't go well. But you have made it. You've made it to the end. We've gone through how to analyze that data. We've even written up a report. What is there left to do? Well, this is a really important thing because there is an important step left to do. It's called go back through the report and make sure that it's all right and it looks good and then it has all the pieces. There's a lot of times that a student will turn in a final report and I'll go through and grade it. Gee, there's a lot of problems here. And when the student comes in, I say, look at some of these problems. They're like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. Well, that wouldn't have happened if you had looked at the rubric. So even though you're excited to be done and you want this video to be short, remember this. When you think you're done, you're actually only halfway done. Let me prove it to you by going to the report we just did. And I'm going to go through this looking at the rubric and seeing whether I like everything that's on here. And let's not forget my little timer here. I'm at 4 hours, and I have done this many, many times, and there was no way for me to get to this step faster than 4 hours. So you should plan for a couple of days to look at the enemy model, a couple of days to look at the civilian model, and a couple of days to write the report. Please don't leave this to the very end. Okay, you know what? I think the first thing I'm going to attack is formatting, readability. Let's try to make my report look a little nicer. And some of this is style choice, which is why I left this in before, but I don't think I like having titles that say this is the methods section and this is the results section. So I'm going to take that out. If you are the type of person who likes to have those in, that's fine. Do it the way you like. I'm going to reorder this to match my style. I'm going to put the civilian stuff, and I'm going to choose to put all that stuff at the end after I talk about enemy. So I'll do all the stuff of enemy, results, conclusion, everything first. Nope, I liked it better that way. And then I'm going to go through the civilian model, not because it needs to be that way, just because that's the way I want my style to be. And stuff like talk about looking at the civilian model. I'm going to check my grammar. I'm going to reread this. You know, I just noticed I have the alpha level of 0.05 in the intro, but I mean, there's reasons why I might do that, but I'm going to talk somewhere here when I actually made my model. Right here, I talked about how I made sure anything that didn't have a small p-value got taken out. That's where I'm going to put that I had my 0.05. I think I like that better than having it right up here. Wow, look at that. Talk about how I used r squared. What was I thinking? This is what happens when you're making a video and you're talking at the same time you're typing. About how I used the program r is what that's supposed to say. Now, the data set called it first aid, but a client would call it first aid. That's a style choice. I don't necessarily care for this class whether you call it first aid all one word, since that was how it was described in the dataset. I've got to admit, rereading this, it sure is easier to write a report where you talk about how instead of actually going through to type it in. So this 4 hours is pretty fast because I'm not even really writing the report. This is pseudo reporting. And here for the civilian model, I noticed I said, talk about how this will affect my predictability, but I didn't say how accurate the predictions were. For the enemy model, up here I did. The error in the prediction is 163. For the civilian model, it's a little trickier because when you get this standard error of 0.026, that's for log civilians. The actual error in prediction is e to that power, so it's about 1.03, I guess, if I round. So this gives me a chance to actually do this. How's this going to affect my predictability? I can predict within 1.03 or 2 standard deviations away, 2.06. When you think about the normal distribution, that's 95% of the time. And the predictability is going to be some averaged piece beyond this. So for small levels of spies, it's actually going to be smaller error. And for larger levels of spies, it's going to be bigger error. That's why the assumption of constant variance can be a problem, is because I've said my predictability is 2.06. That's not always true. It depends on where you're at with the spies. So that's how I'm going to talk about my error in predictability. And then I have my prediction equation. Oh, I was reading this. I forgot. What was I doing? I was just double reading. And there's little grammar things like this. Since I'm doing all enemy first and civilian after, I don't need to say this is for the civilian model. And as you read through it, think about your style. That doesn't matter as much as the variables mentioned earlier. Did it matter? No, but To me, it sounds a little more professional that way. And it's not that I'm going to grade you on whether I like your style, but when you're done with this report, you want to feel proud of it. This is something you could hand to a recruiter for a job. And just going through it and tightening up some of the wording distribution is will really make your report show that you have given it some serious thought and that you've taken it seriously. And trust me, as the one grading this, I can tell when students have really put in time and when they actually care about their report. Oh, you know what I am missing here? I am missing something that talks about how this is a good model and that it's the best model I can do. I'm sitting here debating with myself whether I want to go back through the model and check that I've got all these numbers right. 4 hours, 10 minutes. Yeah, I triple checked when I did it, but I just went back through it just because, you know, I would really hate to make a video and have something wrong. The chance that there's nothing wrong is pretty slim, but hopefully nothing too serious. Now, here's a thought that I've had. I went through how to maximize enemy and how to minimize civilian, but some of these use the same thing. Here's stock and stock, spies and spies. So what if I wanted to do both at the same time? You'll notice that the rubric for this doesn't actually ask you to do that. If this is a hard step, you're not required to do it. And it looks like I lucked out. For the most part, I don't have contradictions. Stock was 1,500 or more, and yet for civilians it would say low stock. So I'm going to say let's aim for this lower range, which also had good values. If you remember, it was a cubic function, and that's what happened there. Spies, it says more spies, and that's also true for the other one. And then low personnel. Personnel, it could be high or low, and high was slightly better, but because personnel for civilians should be low, I'm going to say low personnel, low median, and low bombs. In my data set, it looks like there's not a contradiction, which is too bad, because those are really interesting. What if for high enemy deaths it said more bombs, and for low civilian deaths, what if it had said low bombs? Well, then you'd have to make a judgment call, and it's really impressive if you can recognize the problem and come to your own judgment call. Which one would you recommend? There's no right or wrong answer. I just like seeing that you've thought about it. So I'm going to put in a sentence that mixes both and talks about how these variables are important to both enemies and civilians, and there's also other variables that are important. It would be interesting if I could have a paragraph in here saying this variable is contradictory. More bombs kills more enemies, but it also kills more civilians. I don't know what you should choose, but here's my recommendation. And since I don't have a contradiction, it looks like I can't get away with a paragraph like that. It also occurs to me I've been terribly inconsistent with my capitalization. Am I capitalizing the names of these variables or not? I think whatever I choose, I should at least be consistent. Alright, I chose to turn everything into lowercase. And I think I found them all, but every time I look I find one more that I miss, so... Alright, there we have it. Let's go back to the rubric. I now feel good about the formatting and the readability. I think it's good. Intro. I think I left a lane. Yeah, this whole thing's gonna have to get deleted. Let's try it again. See, that introduction needs to get their attention. It needs to get their interest. This is cool. We're waging a war, and there's, our liberty at stake. I don't know. This is a made-up country and a made-up war, but talk about some reason why this could be a big deal. And you can even make up the reasons why we're going to war and why we want to save the civilians. And so after talking about why it's such a big deal that we have this war, I'm going to talk about why my report specifically is a big deal. This analysis is going to save the country and how it's going to change the way we do war and make everything better for everyone, and something to get excited about. And I did slip in there what program I was using, and I remember talking about the errors and the alpha. That wasn't in my introduction, nor did I feel like I wanted it to be for my style, so I like where it is. Okay, the enemy casualty model. I did go through and talk about how and why I use these, and you know what, now that I look at this list, I talked about the ones that were in my model. What I didn't talk about are the variables that got taken out. These 5 need to be mentioned, and the client deserves to hear that firepower, payload, weapons, temperature, and napalm, those were removed on purpose, not because I forgot about them or it was too big and I couldn't handle them. I really didn't want them in my model. And I knew they shouldn't be there because the p-values were large, but what that means is that these variables were not helping me to predict the enemy deaths, so there was no value to having them in the model. But with that extra little line in there, now every variable has been discussed as relates to enemy deaths. I did say that the residuals look good. Some people like to show the residual plots. Some people just like to mention that they looked at the residual plots. That's a style choice. S explained in context. That was the part where I said the prediction error is 163. So we're good at there. Z, X. R squared is a percentage. You know what? I don't think I did that because as a statistician, I'm not that fond of using R squared to make decisions, but a client is going to want to see it because they will have heard of the correlation coefficient and they want to see that, which means I got to go look it up. My R squared was 0.987, and I just noticed that I didn't capitalize all these. That's going to get annoying real quick. And it looks like I just spaced on all the lines. Well, I did talk about how to maximize, but doing the prediction and the confidence interval for one of the betas, yeah, I kind of didn't do those. So I'm going to use the conf_int command to get that confidence interval. It looks like this cubic term. Now, would a client really want to see this confidence interval? Well, your teacher wants to see it to know that you're doing it right. But let's imagine that they noticed in the prediction equation how incredibly small that number was. And they said, are you sure that that's not supposed to just be 0? And now I've got formatting problems. Why do you have to make this so hard? And a little sentence because I want to prove that I know how to talk about confidence interval, which is actually part of the rubric here. SX. Why is it here and there? Because I want to be clear in the rubric if you lose points about why you may have lost the points. Was it because you didn't do the confidence interval right or because you didn't talk about it correctly? Now for this equation, prediction, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my data set and I'm going to look at row 1 and based on these, well, not civilians, but based on, so what just happened is I hit this, which sorted it based on terrorism, but I want to go back here so that I can find row 1 again. There's row 1. Using these numbers, am I going to get a prediction that's about 2904? There's a couple of different ways I could do this, but I want to do the enemy one longhand, and I'll do a different method for civilian just to show you. And I'm going to start by noticing in row 1, IG88 is installed, which means I need this equation right here. So I'm going to ask R to tell me what are the enemy deaths when the stock value is 955.8. So I put that in right there because that was my stock value. For bombs, I had the number of bombs was 296. So I put 296 right there. And I go through, and I noticed that when I copied and pasted, this was supposed to be stock squared, but R isn't going to show me a little superscript here. So I need to find my stock value of 955.8, and I'm going to say squared explicitly like that. And now that I put in all my values, when I run these, I get my prediction is 4,539. And I can tell if I've done it right. Oh. Well, now hang on before I freak out. How far off could it be? I actually remember typing that in not too long ago. 163. It could be as high as 2 standard deviations, which would be 300-ish or so. And I am way outside that. So you can tell why this is part of the assignment. I am now going to go through these and carefully check my code and see if I can figure it out. Okay, I think I found it. What I did is I took my little piece of paper and I listed them all out, and then I went through each of these, and look right here, 207.6, but it was actually supposed to be okay, so times 10 to the 3, so 123, it shouldn't be 0.6, that 6 should be part of it. Bottom line, there is my error. And when I ran it, after fixing that, 2989, which is awful close to the 2904. How close? 2989 minus 2904. I'm only off by 85. That's great. I feel happy about that. Not only that, but now I can fix those, and I now have great confidence that these equations are actually right. So now I'm going to talk about how I made a prediction. 2904 was my goal, and I got 2989. It's only off by 85, and that's something I should be proud of, and I think a client would be impressed by that, saying, wow, this really works well. Which now covers the prediction equation and the prediction for the first row. I did explain the linear effects with the value and the logged effects, categorical effects. I didn't have any categorical interactions, but I did have numerical interactions, and I had graphical descriptions and some sentences about it. So I'm going to add a little note right here talking about how I looked for interactions and I couldn't see them, and so that's why I didn't have any categorical interactions, which right here means, right, I mean, that's the best I can do because it wasn't there. You'll notice up here it says explain the use or lack of interactions, and if it wasn't supposed to be in the model, that's great. Okay, good morning. See, this video is being done like over several days because you can't sit here for 5 hours and work on this. I really hope you're not planning on doing your final project all at once. Where were we when we left off the video? Oh, so we've done enemy, we're now looking at civilian. So once again, I've done a good job of talking about the variables that were in my model, but I need to make a mention each variable that wasn't included in the model, and I just noticed that I capitalized them. Oh man. Okay, there. So, did I really not talk about S and R squared? I guess I have a prediction equation, but... Oh, and I talked about how to minimize. Looks like I left all the rest of these off. Oh no, I didn't. Look, see, I was about to type it in right here, but it's right up there within 1.03. So there is my S. I do need to talk about the R squared, which is 0.9988. Well, these are all tiny. Which one am I going to do a confidence interval for? Let's do a confidence interval for stock. So there's that confidence interval, and up here's where I talked about R squared. What else am I missing? Oh yeah, let's not forget that prediction. Now there's a couple ways I could do a prediction. Here I have values and a prediction equation. So all I would really have to do is change all these values to match what it says for that first row, and then run this, and I should get my prediction. I'm going to choose to do something different just because I want you to have all the different kinds of code that might be used. So I'm going to do the prediction. The predict.lm command, which asks R to actually do a 95% prediction interval to find the value that I am after. Really? What? Oh, this capitalization problem. What? Alright, now I've had to pull up the actual help menu. Let's try it again. Oh, look at that! So, lower is 3.54, upper is 3.64, and the answer was, this is row 1, 36. Oh, that's not good. Okay, wait. Remember that we are predicting the log of civilians, so I need to take e to these guys. Like this. That gives me my predicted value of 36.39. It could be as low as 34.5 or 38.3. The answer was 36. Awful close to what I got. That's great. That just makes me happy. And you might notice these values have a slightly different error than the plus or minus 2.06. There's several reasons for that, including the idea that it's not going out exactly 2 standard deviations in order to get 95% confidence, and also the fact that in the model it's incorporating all these standard errors, which I'll admit they're very small, so they're not going to make a huge difference, but it does mean that when R does it, it'll account for all that properly, which gives us a really nice interval that I can use in my paper. And I guess the only thing really required in this class is right here, that prediction value, but having the 95% confident, the predicted value, I mean, that just looks impressive, and it makes me proud of my own report. And for those predictions, I did compare them to the actual value. I don't have anything in my paper that I didn't explain. The conclusion probably needs to be fixed up a little bit. So I'm going to want to beef this up. It's very common for people to read the introduction and then flip to the back and read the conclusion. My style, I don't think I want to say conclusion. Some people do, and that's fine. So let's talk about how this is a good report and how we've done really great at predicting these things. And so this little lame conclusion right here can go away, and we want something that sounds exciting and like this is a big deal, and there is still more work to be done. You want to talk about future research because as a statistician, you're in a unique position to help researchers continue to get more grants and research dollars. And let's not forget the last thing I need to do. I need an appendix that shows the summaries and the residual plots. And I think for my style, I do want it to say appendix here. And I don't think it's any surprise why this is here. This allows me to go through and look. Here's the model that you ran. Does that match what you said you were seeing? And here's the coefficients. I can check whether you've interpreted them correctly, especially stuff that has a log. Did you use the right number? And then going through these residual plots, did you miss something? Yeah, look, I still am not happy about that 0, but you know, whatever. And let's see, pi squared cubed. Were there anything in here that you should have seen? And I was looking at this just a minute ago. It does seem like there's a slight curve there. Did I use a quadratic? This is stock. Well, I don't know, right? It makes me tempted to restart this whole thing. And that's the sort of thing that if you really care about your project, this will bug you and you'll want to go in and check that and see whether it's significant or not. But I think at this point, having spent 3 days to make one video and it's a 20-minute video, I think we're good. We'll leave it there. And please notice that I spent 5.5 hours and my report is 10 pages long, and that was pseudo writing. Talk about why I thought this. That's going to take more room if you actually do talk about it. Some people like to put in more, some people like to put in their computer code, some people like to include more residual plots. I have seen final projects come in 10 pages is pretty short, usually not much shorter than that, but I've seen some come in that were 30 pages, even 300 pages. That's a style choice. If that's your style, fine. I'm still going to grade whether what you've got is statistically accurate and whether you've done a good job of explaining it to the client. So I think we're done. I think we're ready. Go for it. Do your final project and make me proud, but more importantly, make yourself proud of how good that final project looks when you're done.